Hey, Hillary. How's it going?
Hi.
Gianna, do you mind helping me out with chat if things come up? I believe I got a couple folks from my team who are going to be on and they can assist. But if you don't mind, like interrupting me if there's some important chat discussion, I'll try to stay focused on presenting. I appreciate that.
No problem, Nina. And I'll just interrupt you for like clarification ones, and maybe we'll save any others till the end. Does that work for you?
Sounds great.
Okay.
All right, so before I jump into presenting some information, and we'll give a little time for folks to join us, I wondered if there was one or two folks who could just introduce themselves and their interests in this meeting this morning, and maybe the organizations that they're working for and how they envision coordinating and collaborating with clean water service providers. Do you have any volunteers?
We have some clean water service providers on the line, so maybe I see Hillary and I see Mike. So I might pick on them if they want to introduce themselves.
Yeah, so I'm Mike Winslow. I'm the serving project manager for the clean water service provider for the Otter Creek Basin.
And Hillary Sullivan with Pulteney Meadowy Conservation District, and also the South Lake QUISP in partnership with the Rutland Regional Planning Commission. I'm definitely interested in this meeting. I guess I'm a little concerned it's going to be challenging to find projects on farms because they're natural resource projects. So, but I don't want to start off on a negative note. So we might get to that.
Thank you, Mike and Hillary. Appreciate understanding the audience with us today a little bit. So as an introduction, my name is Nina Gage. I work as the Assistant Director in the Vermont Agency of Ag Food Markets Water Quality Division. For the past 6 years, I have been managing a couple of our grant programs at the Agency of Agriculture, including the FAP program, Farm Agronomic Practice, and the Capital Equipment Assistance Program. I recently transitioned into the Assistant Director role. So some of the stuff around clean water service providers and agriculture was a little before my time in my current position, but we've been coordinating and collaborating with the Department of Environmental Conservation to land on some clear guidance for folks who are clean water service providers or folks who are proposing projects to clean water service providers. I'm going to start the presentation this afternoon with just a sort of brief overview of some of the programs and work that we do with farms in the state of Vermont through the State Agency of Ag, just to give a little backdrop to some aspects of our work that you may be a little bit less familiar with. And then I'll ground us in the Clean Water Service Provider Rule and the Act 76 statute and talk specifically about how we see the interaction of clean water service provider model and farms. So for a brief introduction of our division, we provide inspection enforcement on farms. So we regulate farms for non-point source agricultural runoff. We do this through a team of farm inspectors, an enforcement division. We also provide education outreach to farms, primarily through a network of partners and service providers across the state. These include folks like our conservation districts, UVM extension staff, as well as farmer-to-farmer networks and watershed groups. So we also provide, educational events and stakeholder meetings directly with farms, but a lot of the work around technical assistance and education happens with our partners who work at the regional and local level. And you might be more sort of familiar in your local level with, who plays this role in your region than who might in a different region. So it changes from area to area of the state who plays a major role in providing services to farms. And we also, through the state of Vermont, provide funding for implementation on farms. Now, compared to some other funding sources, we are, just a piece of the pie. But as an example, we invested about 7.2 million in on-farm implementation programs last fiscal year. Many of these programs are associated with acres of conservation practices and associated phosphorus reductions. Some of them are also structural practices on farms who have production areas that are an issue, as well as pasture areas that are need improvement. So we do that through our best management practice and pasture surface water fencing program. I'm going to go through our programs just to give you the awareness and understanding. If you come across things in your work, I just want you to have that knowledge to refer where appropriate. Farm agronomic practice program focuses on agronomic practices, and so in field, we're talking about cover crop, rotational grazing, no-till planting methods. This is an opportunity farms are eligible for through the state of Vermont. We have a team of engineers who staff and oversee infrastructure projects on farms. They also provide engineering technical assistance, as well as what we call an equip assist. The USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service provides funding, a substantial amount of funding for farms in the state of Vermont. And when the costs of that project exceed greatly the sort of anticipated payment rate that a farm would receive, they have the opportunity to come to the state of Vermont to ask for additional funding in order to make that project happen. We also have an equipment assistance program. This program supports farmers to acquire equipment for conservation purposes. So think about manure injectors, no-till grain drills, which are a type of equipment used for planting cover crop after a cash crop is harvested, typically in the fall, that lasts through the season, the winter season. We also support some, innovative phosphorus extraction equipment on farms, as well as no-till planters. And this is, to support farms who maybe don't have access to this type of equipment, or to support farms who are attempting to increase the amount of cover cropping that they do on their operation. And maybe they operated with a 15-foot grain drill, so we'll support them to expand to a 30-foot grain drill to improve and increase the amount of cover crop adoption on their operations. We have a program called Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. This is a quasi-state federal partnership. So the national USDA Environmental Quality USDA FSA, Farm Service Agency, runs a program called CRP, Conservation Reserve Program. And E stands for Estate Enhancement. So we plan and support installation of filter strips, forested buffers, and grass waterways through this program. Ben Gabos, if folks know or have met him, is our one of our CREP planners, as well as Phil Wilson. This is an incredibly complex program. It involves planning and implementing contracts with 2 federal agencies and 1 state agency. So you can imagine the red tape that has to be gone through. In addition to that, there was a change in the 2018 Code of Federal Regulations that placed some additional requirements on Vermont lands for eligibility purposes under this program, which is another aspect of what our staff support is developing a package that gets sent on a project by project basis to the national FSA folks for review to ensure that we're meeting the Code of Federal Regulations for each individual project. But this program does provide a really wonderful opportunity for farms in that it can provide both annual rental payments for any land that's planted, as well as can support the implementation costs. We've got partners with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, as well as Partners for Fish and Wildlife on a lot of these projects to meet other needs. And a lot of times you'll see a CREP project going in coordination or collaboration with a river corridor project, but there are sort of stringent rules and regulations around when and how those are put in place. So for instance, in order to implement a river corridor easement, a buffer is required. But if the buffer is, CREP, a farmer is only eligible for CREP if that buffer is put into place prior to the river corridor easement being codified and implemented. So incredibly complex program, but a very worthwhile benefit for farms who are willing to take some land out of production for forested riparian buffers, especially. We also have a program that supports pasture improvements. This is to sort of expand and improve pasture rotational grazing systems, as well as especially we support livestock exclusion through this program, excluding animals out of streams and surface water. Per the required ag practices, they are required to in the production area, but not necessarily in summer pasture. So we do support farms to achieve full livestock exclusion. But of course, livestock need to drink water. So that involves, developing watering sources, alternative water sources, if they can no longer access streams for water to drink. So we also have a state program called the Grass Waterway Filter Strip. It comes from statute. It's called the Vermont Seeding and Filter Strip Program in statute. We can provide incentive payments per acre and support farmers to implement filter strips, critical source area seedings, and grass waterways. One of the other things that we're able to do with this program is, a lot of times you're discussing with a farm sort of, a section of a field that you, as a conservation planner, would suggest, being seeded down. And it's a very small field, maybe it's a 10 or 12 acre field. It's not really worth it for the farm to sort of transition half of the field into a filter strip if the other half, isn't worthwhile for them to sort of plant and harvest another crop from. So in some circumstances, in what we'll call like a critical source area, we'll support sort of transitioning the field into perennial vegetation in its entirety if it has a resource concern we're attempting to abate. So that's a short and dirty couple assistance programs through the state of Vermont. In addition, the Agency of Ag provides a variety of other funding opportunities for farms. And you can access this on our website 2 different ways. There's a funding opportunities tab at the top of our page. And if you navigate to water quality, we also have a specific list of our assistance programs through water quality. So we are one aspect of the puzzle, and I really appreciate this quote. Conservation on farms can be a bit like completing a puzzle, taking one piece at a time and finding the best fit. And I agree with it. Every farm is different. Every situation and resource concern can have a different approach for resolution in some cases. But we, along with the 8 other organizations listed on this screen, are members of the Vermont Ag Water Quality Partnership. You'll notice that the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation is as well. I'm going to play a short video that describes what the Vermont Ag Water Quality Partnership does and where they play a role. But in essence, these organizations work together to coordinate conservation on farms and implementing water quality improvement practices and protecting fish and wildlife. And I might just have to share with audio. 1 second. All right.
The Vermont Agricultural Water Quality Partnership is a collaboration across Vermont
between the organizations who work to reduce water quality impacts from farm and farmland.
The partnership's mission is to accelerate improved water quality
by collaborating to provide outreach, education, technical, and financial assistance
directly to farmers with respect for each partner's vision, role, and capacity.
So the partners are absolutely crucial, and it's a very Vermont thing. We all see the benefits of working together, working with farmers directly to take research findings and put them into practice on individual farm fields. Working with people in different communities, pulling together community organizations like the Watershed Alliance groups. That's all UVM extension. None of us can do all of it alone, so we have to work with each other, and we do.
So our overall role is to reduce non-point source reduction pollution from agriculture. And we do that through doing the innovation work a lot with the partnership, as well as obviously we have the regulatory role, but we are able through clean water funding and other partnerships to be able to help move projects forward that are the innovation for the future of where we want to find new technologies. The technical and financial assistance is probably the biggest, so several $1 million going out to the partnership to help run education outreach programs, implement projects directly with farmers, implementing practices, helping purchase equipment, anything that can help promote cleaner water.
We provide on-site free technical assistance to landowners to help them better understand their land with the goal of moving them towards a more sustainable operation. We also provide financial assistance through a variety of programs that help install many conservation practices. And in addition to that, we work with partners here in Vermont, like the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, to acquire easements on farmland to ensure that they stay in farmland in perpetuity.
Our major focus is fish and wildlife habitat, and so we work with the ag water quality partners and private landowners to improve fish and wildlife habitats on projects that are also going to provide water quality improvement.
Well, the partnership puts on this event once a year. This is our third annual statewide meeting, but we work all year. So every month we get together at the leadership level to go through a variety of different things. We're working on different ideas around how to connect funding resources to people who need that in order to implement different kinds of practices.
Our role is to provide support, financial support through loans. Oftentimes our loans are a bridge to a final takeout by NRCS for EQIP. And on the conservation side, Kim manages a program that's really important for water quality.
Our biggest conservation program in Vermont is the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, and that's where we pay our farmers and landowners to install some of these important practices like the riparian buffers on environmentally sensitive land and fencing and livestock crossings. And not only do we cost share those practices, sometimes at 100%, we also pay them a rental rate because they're taking their land out of production and we're compensating them for doing that.
DEC overall and the agency itself are the delegated authority for implementing the Clean Water Act work in the state of Vermont. We're the ones that are ultimately responsible for making sure that our rivers and streams and lakes all meet the criteria that they need to meet. So it's really critical that we coordinate with all the various partners around the state and make sure that we're engaging with them and that we can be most efficient and effective in implementing the work that we need to do with the limited amount of resources that we have.
We have a nutrient management planning program funded by NRCS and co-funded by the Agency of Ag. So we're really trying to reach the farmers who aren't part of the larger permitting process and bring them into the system that provides benefits to them as they solve water quality problems. The Conservation District staff do the outreach and education of the farmers and draw them into the program and sign them up. The Vermont Association of Conservation District land treatment planners do the land treatment plan that's necessary as a prerequisite for the nutrient management plan. And then University of Vermont Extension actually teaches the class and develop the software. The farmers develop their own plans. We believe that by developing their own plans, farmers will understand them better and understand better the choices that they have to make and the cost benefit of saving nutrients on the farm and applying them appropriately, which both saves the bottom line and protects water quality in Vermont.
We work to improve water quality in Lake Champlain. Agriculture is a large part of the land base, and we bring dollars towards research for best management practices and other unanswered questions which might in the end lead to improved water quality.
The only way we achieve our mission is through the work we do with partners. We fund lots of partners buying permanent easements and protecting farmland. In the process of doing that work, we partner really closely with all the organizations in the partnership to kind of improve environmental stewardship as we're protecting that farmland forever. 15 years ago, we started a farm and forest viability program at the HEB, which is again another partnership with many others. We provide some specific water quality grants through that program directly to farmers to help match other partners' sources of funding. We also provide through that program business planning and technical assistance to farmers, looking at profitability, but also resource management.
I'm the State Resource Conservation
Land treatment planner.
Hybrid Engineer.
I am a river scientist.
And soil conservation.
Assist farmers with water quality issues.
So that is just sort of a sneak peek into the agricultural conservation world that we work in Vermont. And I recognize that many of the folks on this call have a deep and vast knowledge of a lot of the stormwater and natural resource sector and developed lands work. And I'm a bit less familiar with that. So wanted to share a piece of our work to help frame and calibrate us in this conversation. So Act 76 of 2019, it termed the Clean Water Service Delivery Act. This is right from DEC's website, but provides assurances to meet non-regulatory targets, establishes some of the interim phosphorus reduction targets, and created clean water service providers. I think one thing to note is, agriculture wasn't really the focus of this model, and that's sort of where we're coming out the gate to provide clear guidance in terms of our work as partners, partnering for clean water. Trying to focus in our specific areas of expertise and programming. After the act was passed, the Secretary of Administration authored a memo in January of 2020 to further sort of define and clarify how this breakdown would work between clean water service provider model and some of the agricultural service provider model that already existed on in the agricultural sector for Vermont. And this memo sort of lays out that, any ag practice on a jurisdictional wrap farm wouldn't be considered eligible for the clean water service provider model. It also laid out sort of the areas of focus for clean water service providers on farms to include innovative projects. It also set up some of the coordination between the Agency of Ag and the Department of Environmental Conservation in terms of checking in on a quarterly basis. Further, the Agency of Natural Resources, DEC, developed the Clean Water Service Provider Rule, which further defines sort of that projects are eligible when it's a natural resource project on farm or when it's on agricultural land that's not subject to required agricultural practices. That's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. I'm a visual learner, so I like to picture things in a visual sense, lots of flowcharts and images. This is sort of an easy reference square. It's contained in the Clean Water Service Provider guidance that Gianna had sent out prior to this meeting. What it lays out is that, if you're working in a space and on a project site that is not considered a required ag practice operation, another term we use is a non-RAP, or backyard farming is another term that we often use. In this case, any water quality restoration formula grant project type would be eligible, as long as you have some confirmation that the operation is not a jurisdictional farm. And anyone who meets, the threshold, and I'll go over those in a second, around acreage or income to be a farm, wouldn't be eligible for projects to be implemented on. There's some additional sort of considerations where the secretary has the authority to pull a farm into jurisdiction. I'm not going to get into that too much today, but part of our process for launching this new model in our coordination is to start to track and share a list of farms who may have otherwise been considered non-RAP operations and are receiving enforcement action and thus are getting pulled into a jurisdictional farm space. So we haven't in the past had the need to track that as deeply, but we hope to be able to improve our ability to track and coordinate in that space, because I know folks had that question a few times. And when you're working on any project site that falls under the jurisdictional farm definition, non-agricultural projects will be eligible after VAFM review. And, these include wetland restoration, river corridor, some natural resource restoration projects on farms. And the projects that are not eligible on jurisdictional farms include agricultural practices. We have, a long list of what's considered an agricultural practice, but I think one way to think about it is this practice sort of treating or attempting to abate what would be considered agricultural runoff. So some examples are filter strips, manure injection, rotational grazing, or waste storage facilities on farms. And the reason for this is really we have a plethora of programs in place to support farms in achieving regulatory compliance and reducing non-point source runoff. So the attempt is to sort of focus on areas. Our hope is that the Clean Water Service Provider model is a new opportunity for water quality improvement projects and is meeting a need that isn't already met in terms of assistance programs available. As I said,
Nina, can I pause you for a second?
Yes, you may.
Mike Winslow is asking about ineligible projects, and if they are ineligible, can the CWSP still provide sort of match support if the Agency of Ag and USDA funding doesn't get the farmer to a full 100%? And I can start there and say that the way that these have been defined, we're really keeping very clear swim lanes separate. And so there's not really a point in which sort of an eligible project type for a CWSP could or should overlap with what's being funded by these other agencies. And we're also, what we've tabled and need to put into guidance is sort of the phosphorus crediting for clean water service providers for providing match on projects, not just in the ag field, but elsewhere, and what leveraging should look like from a crediting perspective. So that is sort of more to come on that front. And it's certainly a great question, but I think right now there's not a lot of opportunity for that in this space. Nina, I don't know if you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just agree. The funding sources are really coming from the Clean Water Fund Board. They're all coming from the same space. So I would definitely not advise attempting to match an agricultural project on a farm. It's very complex. As our business manager will attest, we often get shoe boxes with receipts related to a project that take days to review. And when you bring match in, it gets even more complex. So yeah, I will second Gianna in that space that considering that these are funded from the same sources and considering these projects are not eligible, match would equally be not eligible in that regard. It looks like Emily has her hand up, so I'm gonna give you the space to respond as well, Emily.
Thank you, Nina and Gianna. Just to add to that, Nina, is it also accurate that there are caps in statute on how much state cost share can be provided to a project, and BHCB has some programs that allow for bridging that gap in some cases? So we would also just want to be mindful of that if I am remembering that correctly.
Yep, that's correct. There's also caps in terms of our ability to match federal projects. So it can get complex very, very quick. And just to revert back to Gianna's piece, I think we're trying to provide some clear guidance up front so that we don't get ourselves into really complex situations. So the goal for clean water service providers in our perspective is to focus on gaps in areas for funding and clean water non-regulatory projects that are currently not being met through existing programs. Okay, as I mentioned, I really appreciate visuals. This is a flow chart that gives you a sense of what the steps you will need to take during the project screening process. So these two questions are included in the project screening form. I'm just going to pull that up and show you how to find it. So Gianna included this in her email a few days ago, but on DEC's website, under Clean Water Fund Grants, Applicant and Recipient Resources, the CWSP Project Eligibility Screening Process Form, page 8, begins the sort of two-part project screening process related to projects on agricultural lands. So the first question is whether the project is located on a jurisdictional farm. And the second question is whether the project is proposed as an agricultural project. So if the project is not on a jurisdictional farm and folks feel, absolutely sure that's the case, there's no requirement for any agricultural review on that project. You'll follow the sort of standard process for submission to the Basin Water Quality Council for funding. Now, in cases that are unclear, we ask that you seek assistance with the Agency of Ag. And in cases that are clearly on a farm, you'll move on to the second question. So I'm going to just talk through the first question a little bit. Again, is it proposed on a jurisdictional farm operation? Yes or no? So we operate what we consider to be 4 different sizes of farms: small farm, certified small farm, medium farm, and large farm operations. Typically, where you're going to be interacting with this question is probably in the SFO and CSFO space. Small farm and certified small farm. A farm operation is considered a farm if they operate 4 or more acres for farming, if they filed a 1040-F tax form once in the last 2 years, or if they earn an annual income of more than $2,000 from the sale of agricultural products. There is another space, which is a farm can provide a prospective business or farm management plan approved by the Secretary, describing how they intend to meet these threshold requirements. And as I mentioned, there is also an additional space around, if there's a major water quality concern, the Secretary can pull the farm under jurisdiction. So a couple of examples to go through just to provide. These folks have a 17-acre farm. They grow fruits and vegetables, raise swine and poultry, and they gross more than $2,000 from agricultural sales. So the answer in this case is a very clear yes, this is a farm regulated by the required agricultural practices, and they would probably be considered a small farm operation. Some key things here: more than $2,000 or more, and they exceed that 4-acre threshold for farming. Here's another example. Someone recently bought a 3-acre farm, and they've started to grow flowers. They plan to sell their flowers and anticipate making over the $2,000 threshold. So in this case, the response would be Potentially, if the farm is seeking a determination, they would need to submit a business plan to be reviewed and approved by the agency. So in this case, it might be more complex, more confusing. These are the types of cases that we hope you will seek our assistance in those determinations. We have a process called farm determination for these sort of more complex spaces. Now you have an example of individual with a 1 acre parcel, and they have 25 laying hens and grow vegetables. They use the eggs and vegetables for their own consumption, and they do not sell any produce. So this person may be engaged in agricultural activities, but wouldn't meet the thresholds to be regulated by the required agricultural practices. They'd be considered a non-jurisdictional farm under municipal regulation. So I hope that helps give just a couple of examples of like a clear-cut case and a sort of fuzzy case where you might seek assistance from the Agency of Ag in that determination. As I mentioned, we have a process. It's called a farm determination. It is available on our website. Gianna also included it as a paper form, PDF, and the attachment sent around to recipients of this meeting invitation. Typically, we work with farms on farm determinations for a few different reasons. They're applying for a variance for their farm structure. Sometimes folks are requested as they go about sort of an improvement on their property. They're requested by their municipality or their town clerk to have this determination made. And or when they're applying for an accessory on-farm business is another example. So again, our hope is that, you know, for the cases in which it's not clear, you'll come to us for guidance or an official determination. And for cases that are pretty clear cut and straightforward, we feel comfortable with folks, you know, making an initial determination on their own if it's clear. I'm going to pause really quick. Give ourselves a second. Is there any questions in this space? Folks have to bring up. Yeah, Hillary.
Okay, maybe this is impossible, but what about, what if you had a non-jurisdictional farm? I'm thinking of maybe like a couple of horses on a couple of acres, but you wanted to do an agricultural project. Would that be something that the QUISP could fund, like a little manure stacking pad or something like that for them?
Yes, so agricultural projects on non-jurisdictional farms would be eligible for clean water service providers to implement.
Okay. And then of course the phosphorus reduction would have to be worthwhile, but okay, thank you.
You're welcome. That's a great example.
Can I just chime in though, Hillary? Sorry, this is Laura DePietro. It would just be important to check in with us first, especially, you know, you'll hear them often like maybe complain about what they're going on at their site or whatever, but we can pull, as Nina said, some of these folks under jurisdiction. And so sometimes these smaller farms, what happens, we'll call them farms, right? Neighbors complain or whatever, and it gets on our radar. If we get a complaint from a neighbor, we have to go inspect because we have to determine whether they're a farm or not under our jurisdiction. If there's a water violation that exists, we can take them under our jurisdiction. And so if there is something that's a water quality violation, and it could be groundwater, it could be surface water, we might already be under enforcement or be dealing with them. So again, it's always just, if there's anything agriculturally related and there's something that seems concerning, it's best just to check in and go through that process, because these are the squeaky wheels. These are the ones that do call us a lot of times and complain, and that's why we end up out there. So it's rare that we take them under our jurisdiction. The process we're supposed to do is talk to the municipality and say, do you want this? But a lot of times, as you know, the capacity of a municipality is not interested or able to take on enforcing against a backyard neighbor dispute related to a few animals. So if there's water involved, we can take jurisdiction, and that's what complicates this a little bit.
So I have a follow-up question then, and I don't mean this to sound silly. So currently, when we do tree plantings on farms, we don't seek permission from Agency of Ag. If we were going to do a tree planting on a farm with funding that wasn't coming through the formula grant, is there now sort of an idea that we would run those projects by Agency of Ag, or is it just for the formula grant that those projects would be reviewed?
I can speak to that. So Hillary, any project on a jurisdictional farm is under this, sorry, I forget the term, clean water formula grant, you would need to request a review and approval. So agricultural projects wouldn't be eligible, and other project types are potentially eligible upon review.
Okay. So if we were using private dollars, for example, would we still want to run it by Agency of Ag now as a new step, or is that just, you're saying just like quip funds?
Yeah, we don't have it. There's no like regulatory requirement or statutory requirement for you if you have like a local conservation organization that's supporting some projects and the landowners on board. In general, I always sort of recommend that folks, you know, when they have agricultural projects, are helping the farmer assess the best option. So if you've got a small tree planting and you guys are ready to rock on it, that's great. If it's an operation where, you know, they might benefit better from a CREP project, you know, I'm assuming you're already in contact with Ben about whether it's a good site for CREP or not. So that's sort of our hope, is that we are helping farms get the best available resources that they may be eligible to receive.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Hillary, just one way to think about this, because that has been going on for years, is that the formula grant is a proportionment of a phosphorus reduction coming from the budget, right? And so agriculture is actually responsible for that phosphorus reduction from the budget. And so that's why the structure is set up that way. But if you're going to do a project like that with other funds outside of this program, it is best, you know, if you can meet the minimum requirements of the buffer, that's the step one, right? You would never want to have a farm set up for non-compliance. But there's also statute that says, you know, if for some reason, whatever you were doing required an easement, that there's some requirements there that you have to compensate the farmer for the loss of that land, which was put in a few years ago by Senate Ag. So just, you know, if you ever have questions, just check in with us, because we can navigate, we keep our fingers on all that stuff to understand what's going on.
Okay, so I'm bringing us back to our visual flow chart here. Once you made a determination or received assistance from our agency on determination that it is indeed located on a jurisdictional farm, it's going to push you into question 2. And again, this is part of the project screening form process. If the proposed project is considered an agricultural project and it is on a jurisdictional farm, it is not an eligible project under the Clean Water Formula Grant Program under the Clean Water Service Provider model. Now, if it is not an agricultural project, think of a wetland restoration project on a farm operation, then those projects are potentially eligible and will just require review from the Agency of Agriculture. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this question, is it an agricultural project? And then I'll talk a little bit about what our review process, we anticipate our review process to be in this space. As I mentioned, this is part 2 of the screening process. And again, if it's an agricultural project on a jurisdictional farm, it's not an eligible project type. If it is not an agricultural project, the natural resource, innovative, or other project type will receive an agricultural review. Now, our statute under agricultural water quality has sort of 2 big picture areas of what we like to call agricultural land use practices. It includes both required agricultural practices for farms preventing agricultural pollutants, as well as best management practices, which are on-farm site-specific conservation practices implemented in order to address the potential for agricultural pollutants. The required ag practices themselves regulate a very wide variety of agricultural practices on farms, and I've highlighted a few in bold just to give some examples. But fencing on farms is an agricultural practice. Stabilization of farm fields adjacent to banks of surface water is an agricultural practice. Construction and maintenance of farm structures, farm roads, and associated infrastructure, as well as the storage, preparation, and sale of agricultural products principally produced on the farm. So we have a wide variety of what we consider to be agricultural land use practices. Now, sorry, I should have flashed back my flow chart here, but once you've determined that the proposed project is not an agricultural practice and thus may be eligible for funding on a farm, you will submit the project details to the Agency of Ag for review. I've had a couple of emails in the last couple of weeks, so it sounds like folks are beginning to consider projects, but we have not received any at this point in time for review. We have not set up an official form for you to utilize. At this point, we're just asking for an email with the following information. What's the project you're planning? What is the site location, exact location? What's the sort of detailed description of the project? And who is the landowner and or land operator? and any considerations that you would deem sort of relevant to our review process. When we receive this information, our goal is to, ideally within 30 days, take some time to review. We're going to be looking at a few different aspects. First and foremost, we're going to be looking at whether it's considered an agricultural project. So is whatever is proposed, attempting to treat agricultural waste or agricultural runoff. Are there any active issues that we have associated with that specific site and or that specific farm operation that would be maybe a consideration in this whole thing? We're going to review whether there's maybe another agricultural program that might be a better fit to resolve the site concerns, in our opinion, based on our sort of history of working with farm operations. Just to give an example, management is a really key piece of projects on farms, right? If we're going to provide funding to support implementation of a project that requires regular operation and maintenance, like having a conversation with a landowner in advance of whether they have capacity to support that or not, is like really crucial point of successful projects that have really long-term sort of operation maintenance support from the operator. And lastly, we're probably going to review and provide some considerations if there's any agricultural regulations that need to be followed during or after project implementation. Laura mentioned one, right? Is the buffer width appropriate for the surface water site that the project is adjacent to? As I mentioned, we don't have a special designated form at this point in time. We might create one, but we're going to let a few projects come in so we can sort of build our system and process for tracking and reviewing these projects as they develop. Our friends at DC sent us a few frequently asked questions to consider as part of this training. So I just wanted to go over a few. And I got this in an email last week as well. But how do you do a preliminary review to determine if an operation is jurisdictional and considered a farm under the required agricultural practices? Depending on the size of the farm, farms will typically know the size of their operation. When you get into the small farm operation space, that might be where they might not be able to tell you what size of farm operation that they are. I would recommend, first identifying the project site, speaking to the relevant landowners about whether they have land control or whether it's leased to another operation. And if it is leased to another operation, you're going to need to speak to the person who has lease control of that land. And you're going to ask that individual about the size of their operation. Now, if they're not sure, the farm determination form has a really great reference of the sort of threshold points, and you can ask them those questions, which are a little bit more relevant to sort of their business, their gross sales, or the acreage that they operate. And that might be an easier way for them to understand if they're not sure what size farm operation they are. What projects do we expect clean water service providers to be implementing on non-jurisdictional farms? Sorry, I think I read that wrong. On jurisdictional farms, sorry, I'm gonna edit in real time here. On farms, we anticipate clean water service providers to be working on potential wetland restoration, river corridor easements as an example. And on non-RAP farm operations, I think buffers are an example of projects that could be going in on non-RAP operations. And as Laura mentioned, if you're unsure and there's a water quality concern, the truth is that we can pull them into our jurisdiction if it is a violation. So this one was good. I got an email about this last week too. So how frequently do farmers lease land? What's the typical length? And how well are they documented on paper? So in general, it's going to depend. I would say most farms, but maybe not all, lease some amount of land. And the length and formality of those leases is going to vary greatly from one farm to the next, and potentially even from one landowner to the next. I know some very well-established farms who rely heavily on leased land, and I don't believe they have any formal written lease for those land areas. So it's really good to just ask the right questions and ask questions maybe in a different way to get information about who might be actually operating the land under a lease. But we are, if a farm operation is leasing that land, that land is then considered part of their jurisdictional farm operation. And another good one, so state and federal support programs for woody riparian buffers. There's a ton of options. You can work through NRCS, through the EQIP program, to do woody riparian buffers. CSP can support that. That's another NRCS program. As I mentioned and talked a bit about, the CREP program is a really wonderful option for farms to both receive implementation support as well as annual rental payments for the land that they're taking out of production. I know the Trees for Streams program is a sort of big supporter of repairing buffers. And then of course we have our groundwater filter strip program, which really focuses on filter strips. And I'll just mention that when you have an agricultural field and you have some sort of buffer that is filtering the runoff from that field, we really promote harvestable buffers. So as you know, land that sort of gets forgotten on the edge of a field might look a little different than a sort of wide filter strip buffer that a farmer could actually harvest hay from. And one of the benefits is as runoff is filtered through a filter strip, a lot of sedimentation can occur in that buffer, and there can be over time and over the lifespan of that practice, pretty considerable sort of deposition of nutrients. As we all know, when you harvest, it's a really great mechanism of taking nutrients off that area or tract of land. So when you have filter strips that are filtering an intense amount of runoff, harvesting them is one of the best ways you can continue to maintain them. We find working with farm operations that it's a wonderful mechanism for, incentivizing good maintenance and operation of those filter strips.
Hey, Nina.
Yeah.
Mary. There's a question in the chat from Neil, and I was about to respond, and then I thought it might be worthwhile to actually just talk about it because I want to make sure the group sees it. So there's questions about the leased land and farming activities on those leased lands because, as we know that leases can change, which is something we just talked about. But Neil's question is, let's say that a producer leases some land offsite. So maybe not adjacent to his farmstead for the purpose exclusively of manure management by their NMP. There are no remaining uses of the parcel associated with the operation. Would the owner of the leased land be able to obtain clean water service provider assistance for something like a forested buffer, stream restoration, or the like? So I think the answer here, and there could be some discussion, is that, well, I'm not entirely sure what you might intend to mean by manure management, but if they're applying manure and they're cropping that field, that is a jurisdictional field under the RAPs and part of that farming operation. So something like a forested buffer, we may need to consider in collaboration with the available buffer programs for agricultural land. But things like river corridor easements and stream restoration projects, yes, I think that those can still be considered through the clean water service provider, even though they're on agricultural lands because they're not agricultural projects.
Yeah, I'll just add that the question hits on a really key part of what a lot of our service providers are pretty well, have a lot of experience in, which is managing the relationship between a farmer and a landowner, which can be a very delicate conversation at times. You don't want to jeopardize the farm operations ability to utilize that land. And at the same time, the landowner has, final say at the end of the day if they want to see some improvement happen. So it's really important to be considerate of that relationship and potentially long-standing, way before we come in to tell them we want to do a project there, and just be considerate of all the factors that would be at play. So I might just
Thank you
recap.
so much, Nina.
Yeah, I might just recap briefly the documents that Gianna provided in an email prior to this meeting. You can reference the flow chart, which I reference in this in terms of what happens when and what situations. There is a copy of our paper farm determination form, and there is also an online form if you come into a space where it's a complex determination and you're going to request agency input. But these 4 questions are those threshold questions that we're looking for when we are doing a farm determination. So you can reference those here or print it off if it's easy to take around with you. And then again, this is a guidance that we developed, which sort of summarizes a lot of what we talked about today in our PowerPoint, but just all in one place in a nice printable document. I know that some folks really still prefer paper. So, and again, I'm just gonna leave our contact information up on the screen if you'd like to talk about this stuff. we're more than happy to assist in whatever way we are able to. Mary Montour, who just spoke, is really manages a lot of our farm determination process. Have a lot of experience with our cost share programs. Mary does as well. And then Laura DePietro, of course, was speaking earlier, and she's director of our division. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much, Nina and Mary and Laura, for a lot of that great clarification. I'm also happy, let me know, I can resend around any of those resources if that is useful. We will find a final home for them. The eligibility screening form does have a home on the website, but these other documents, I don't know if we've quite found a home for them yet. Are there other questions for Nina or the ag team? Great.
I have a question about reaching out to you, Nina, especially now that you have a new role. If people have questions in this space, who should be the first frontline staff member that they reach out to in your shop?
Yeah, at this point, I would say Mary or myself is an absolutely fine. You know, we're awesome email folks. So as you know, we're multitasking most parts of every day. Please feel free to reach out to either one of us, and we'll pull Laura in as needed from there. We do have some new capacity on our team, and they Noah is actually on the call today, and Noah might be playing a little bit of a role, but this is all very new to everyone, so we just anticipate sort of playing it, you know, have a little bit of an iterative process here as we get things off the ground. So don't hesitate to reach out to Mary or I as primary contacts.
Well, I realize we're recording this, so if that changes and this is on the video, that's it's now embedded here for you know, time immemorial. But yeah, that's helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. I'll just add that, you know, we're really excited that the Clean Water Service Provider model is a new opportunity for clean water projects. I know in my own town and neighborhood, there's ideas that I have. So I really hope that clean water service providers have some good areas to look, and just know that we have a pretty considerable system in place for working on farms and getting projects in, and farmers tend to be a little too confused about all of our opportunities as it is. So we're trying to keep some clear lines in the sand as this new funding opportunity gets off the ground.
I have a question, Nina. You had mentioned looking around your town, and so I'm always a little bit confused about composting facilities, large scale composting facilities, and whether that falls under waste management or ag, or what is the role of ag in those sorts of sites, and is that an ag project or not to manage water runoff from composting sites?
Yeah, Laura, if you're on with us still and want to respond, that would be great.
Yeah. I highlighted my little bubble because I figured that'd be the case. So this is an evolving space because some of the changes that have happened in statute as of late, and there's rules under development that are in the process for doing this. So essentially, if a not farm is composting, there's thresholds that, you know, typically it's regulated by A&R, but there are thresholds where small sites taking in some material, so like 2,000 cubic yards or less a year of food residuals or food processing residuals, can be exempt from their rules and put under the required ag practices as a farm. The two requirements for that are either one, they have, you know, they meet the threshold for RAP again for having chickens, or two, they solely use that all on their own farm. So I think the majority of the time you're going to find that even those that are exempt are operating some type of operation, like a farm operation. There is the odd chance and event that they could be more like a commercial composter because they have poultry and they're feeding the poultry are foraging on it, but they export and sell the material off-site. They might be regulated by us. So they might look more like a commercial operation versus like a backyard operation, and be regulated by us. And then just another caveat is if any site is taking any slaughter or carcass or other mortality type waste, that is not on a farm, then it is, obviously, it's a solid waste site, it needs to be regulated by A&R. So there are no exemptions for, like a farm can take their own stuff, but if somebody takes something from a farm and puts it on not a farm, it's not their farm, there is not an exemption for that. So anyways, it's a little complicated, maybe more complicated than the Ag Water Quality Partnership some days, but it is evolving, and that is why. And so again, if you come across somebody who is doing some level of composting, because there is the landfill requirement that food scraps can't go to landfill, so you're going to see in the next number of years just more and more operations starting to get into this space. Just check in with us, because again, the rules are going to go through rulemaking and things are going to change. So it's best just to give a call, tell us what's going on. But be aware, like you might tell us about something and we might be like, hey, that wasn't on our radar. Thank you. We'll be following up with those folks, right? So there is that piece that, you know, we do have a responsibility to follow up and make sure we regulate sites under this new stuff. So anyways, I know that wasn't really the answer. That was super clear, but a little context.
Thanks for the tough ones. We like those that keep us young.
Well, I want to
Great, well-
echo Gianna's thanks. Appreciate you making the time for us again, because this is the second time you're doing this presentation, but now to the wider network. And just appreciate your being a resource here to explain your programs and the interaction here and working with us in DEC. So many thanks to you for that. And I don't have anything else. Is there any last minute questions? Or I guess with that, I'll stop recording. Thank you all.
And thanks to your whole team.